In a lot of ways, Star Trek Nemesis is just strange. For a lot of people, it's one of those love it or hate it films. And as it's the 10th one, it gets a lot of people to begrudgingly admit that maybe the whole odd-numbered bad, even-numbered good thing was bullshit. Finally. For whatever reason, it was quite a while, 4 years in fact, between Insurrection and Nemesis. And after the critical and commercial successes of Generations, First Contact, and Insurrection, I was personally very surprised to find Nemesis being preemptively billed as the final film. I wondered, why stop a good thing with only 4 movies? I thought to myself, maybe they were planning on making movies out of Deep Space Nine or Voyager, both of which had ended by the time Nemesis showed up, but that never happened. Now, I don't want to get too much into the typical criticisms and defenses that I've seen for Nemesis. I know that people liked it, and I know that people absolutely hated it, but one review that I read stuck in my head quite a bit. A review by Mr. Furious of Movie Comics fame, who's also a Trek fan. He said that if you view Nemesis as being just another Star Trek movie, it's pretty damn good. But if you view it as being the Next Generation film, it's a disappointment. I can't help but echo that statement somewhat. There's things wrong with the film, quite a lot of things, but nothing is so crippling that I couldn't outright say it's awful, and by no means the worst Trek film. It's enjoyable, just a step down from the previous 4 films. But when viewed as being the Next Generation era film, I wondered at the time why they didn't come up with something more epic. Rewatching it again for this review, the first time that I've seen Nemesis since its release, I've come to realize that they tried. But they went about it in the wrong way. One major mistake was not having Jonathan Frakes direct, or failing that, at least using another cast member, or someone who would at least understand Star Trek. The director, Stuart Bayard, did a decent enough job of crafting a science fiction movie, but it was reported that he never saw a single episode of the show. He clashed notoriously with LeVar Burton, who said the film flat out sucked, and Marita Sirtis echoed these sentiments. I've also heard, though I'm not sure I believe this, that Jonathan Frakes outright said that if he directed it, the film would have made more money. Unfortunately, it hardly made any money at all, being the first Star Trek film to not debut at number 1, losing to an insipid J-Lo movie, and then disappeared very shortly after from theaters. Come to think of it, I was lucky to see it at the time, as it would be the last Trek movie for 7 years. So let's talk about the actual film, eh? Nemesis starts off on the planet Romulus, the center of the feared Romulan Star Empire, which had been a strong adversary to the Federation all throughout the Next Generation era. The Romulan Senate are all talking about this one guy, Shinzon of Remus, who has built up a following and an army and wants to join the Romulans in an all-out assault on the Federation. The Senate are like, Reman, please. The Remans are a bat-like humanoid race that live on the dark side of Remus, Romulus' sister planet, and they've never been seen before. They're seen as an untouchable caste, the lowest form of society in the Empire, used mostly as slave labor. After they pretty much tell these dirty Reman bastards to bite the curb, the entire Senate, except for one Romulan woman who is clearly allied with Shinzon, all get assassinated in a pretty damn horrific manner. Later you find out that this is a deadly type of radiation that Shinzon has learned to control. It can kill a great many people in a span of seconds. After this, we're treated to the reception at Riker and Troy's wedding. Riker has grown back his trademark beard after leaving the Briar Patch, it seems, but his romance with Troy remains rekindled, and now they're married. Riker is now a captain and is going to take command of the Titan, so he's leaving the Enterprise along with Troy, much to Picard's chagrin. Worf is there, of course, after several novels have explained that he was also going to be on board the Titan, Deep Space Nine having ended as first officer. They all head off to the next wedding, the Betazoid one, where you're promised for a lot of naked Trek flesh, but of course that doesn't happen. Worf picks up some positronic emissions coming from a nearby uncharted planet. Picard decides to go down and check it out, going personally, mostly because he wants to try out his awesome new dune buggy. On the planet, they find Data's brother. No, not Lore, but this other brother we never heard of, a prototype called B4. I can swallow this, but it never sat right with me that throughout all of this they never even mention Lore. Poor bastard gets no love. Anyway, they assemble B4, and he's fairly primitive and kind of funny. Then they get a call from Vice Admiral Janeway. Yep, that's right, the same person who captained the Voyager and was lusted after by comic book guy, who needs a modem that can bring him faster nudity. Anyway, the new Romulan praetor, Shinzon, who is not a Romulan at all, but a Reman, has invited a Federation ship to come to the planet for peace talks. As the Enterprise is the closest, they're sent off. Upon arriving, they wait for a long time and then are greeted by the Reman warship the Scimitar, which intimidates the hell out of them, but gives them transporter coordinates. Upon meeting Shinzon, Picard finds that he's not a Romulan or a Reman, but a human, and that he bears a striking resemblance to Picard. Okay, not really, but he is bald. Turns out he's a clone from an abandoned military operation to clone Picard and replace him with their own agent. But after a government shift, he was sent to Remus, pretty much to die. He was taken care of by his Reman viceroy, Ron Perlman, and has taken over the Romulans in a coup, and is now looking for peace, or so he says. He voluntarily gives him some of his blood for the crew to analyze after dinner with him. Picard doesn't exactly trust him, but he very much wants to. Unfortunately, Shinzon is full of shit, which Geordi figures out quickly, having detected his deadly weapon. Turns out Shinzon discovered the B-4 and reprogrammed him to do his bidding, then put him on a planet near the neutral zone for the Enterprise to discover, so they'd be closest ship that was ordered to Romulus. Shinzon is aging faster than Ruafu on a bender and needs to take over Picard's body to survive long enough to live out his lifelong dream of destroying Earth. However, Geordi has figured all this shit out and switches the B-4 with Data, who rescues Picard. The Scimitar and Enterprise get into a battle, and the Enterprise takes a pounding, then decides to head back to Federation space to find themselves a fleet. Shinzon follows, cloaked, and initiates the final battle in a rift. He attempts to disable the Enterprise without destroying it. He needs Picard, but Picard just refuses to surrender, coming up with more inventive ways to continue the battle. The Romulans join in, and they join Picard rather than Shinzon. This leads to a fairly awesome space battle. Completely disabled, Picard rams the Enterprise into the Scimitar, and Shinzon knows that he's lost, so he powers up his weapon, deciding to cut his losses. He knows he'll die, but he figures his Reman brothers will carry on afterwards. Picard boards the ship to disable the weapon, but shortly after this, the transporters stop working. Data, knowing that Picard can't come back, does this completely shit-awesome space jump thing to get to the Scimitar. Picard and Shinzon have a great fight that ends with Shinzon impaled on a pole. Ow. Data arrives and slaps an emergency transporter on Picard, beaming him back to the Enterprise, then blows up the ship and himself. In the end, the crew mourns Data's death, Captain Riker and Troy go to their new ship, the Romulans are grateful and want to go into real peace talks, and after a discussion with the B-4 in which he shows potential of growth, Picard realizes that everything is going to be okay. I felt that there were some parallels between this, the last The Next Generation film, and the last original series film, The Undiscovered Country. Both involve overtures of peace between the Federation and a hostile force. Both are deceptive in this manner and lead to a great battle. Both involve a prison colony, though in different ways. And both end up with the hope of bringing down the wall between two great powers. Personally, I think Nemesis is good, but not great. It has a lot of issues, mostly due to the fact that it contradicts the show quite a lot, and even previous movies. It seems that in Insurrection, the idea of Data's emotion chip was downplayed, though it was at least mentioned. In this film, it's like they forgot he ever had one at all. Although there is some great action, the first half of the film is too slow, and it really drags in the second act. In that way, it's a bit like the very first Star Trek film, the motion picture. The beginning and the end are fine, but the middle is just too long and drawn out. Although I find the acting to be stellar, particularly Patrick Stewart, I thought Ron Perlman was wasted. You got a great actor, use him. After watching this film in the context of watching all 11 films pretty much back to back, I've also realized that in a lot of ways they were trying to make another Wrath of Khan. The final space battle in the nebula or rift or whatever is a big part of this, and of course giving Picard a nemesis. Shinzon even pulls a con in the end and signs his own death warrant by firing his ultimate weapon in an attempt to win. The theme of the film is mirror images. Shinzon is a dark reflection of Picard, but I feel he's not suitably fleshed out. He's no Khan, that's for sure. Data's death is also reminiscent of Spock's death. They both sacrifice themselves to save their respective ships from deadly radiation. And like Spock, the final part with the B-4 hints at a resurrection. In the comic series Star Trek Countdown, which bridges the gap between Nemesis and the next film, it was said that Data's neural pathways eventually overwrote those of the B4, leading to a return, much like Spock returned. Hell, he even became captain of the Enterprise after Picard became an ambassador. My final assessment is, plot-wise, I think Nemesis makes a fine end. I just wish the whole thing was executed better. Definitely, I have to agree somewhat with LeVar Burton. I don't think the film sucked like he does, but I have to blame Stuart Bayard. He was a disgustingly untested director, having only directed 2 films, Executive Decision and U.S. Marshals, and he hasn't done anything since Nemesis. I think that most of the movie's real problems would have been solved by just letting Jonathan Frakes direct, or failing that, someone who at least understands Trek or has made more than 2 movies previous. It seems unfathomable to me that Paramount would hand over the 10th movie in a major film franchise to someone who that little bit of experience directing and has never seen Star Trek. I do have to say, though, that I found Nemesis to be better than I remembered, and the ending is quite touching. I particularly like Riker reminiscing about the first time he met Data, laughing at how Data had tried to whistle but couldn't get the tune right, but lamenting the fact that he has long forgotten what the song was. I think in a lot of ways Bayard was trying to echo Nicholas Meyer, with the movie's naval themes and references, as well as borrowing a lot from both The Wrath of Khan and The Undiscovered Country. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I like Nemesis despite its flaws, but I lament the fact that The Next Generation couldn't go out with a really solid movie. Unfortunately, even though the cast was willing to come back, Paramount was not. The box office failure of Nemesis, coupled with the low ratings and eventual cancellation of Enterprise, led Paramount to not be willing to talk about Star Trek for another 6 years. So, another reason that I think people are overly harsh to this film is that it quote-unquote killed the franchise. But in all fairness, it's not bad, it's just not really great. I give Star Trek Nemesis a 7 out of a possible 10.